What would Martin Luther King say if he knew that in 1948, a black boy born in the southern United States couldn't enter the movie theater through the front door? Do you think he'd be surprised? Do you really think Martin Luther King Jr. would be shocked to see a black child climbing the fire escape just to watch a movie, when all he wanted was to feel included in a world that never saw him as whole? No, he wouldn't be shocked, because he already knew, because he lived it, because he carried that weight too. Samuel L. Jackson isn't just a Hollywood name. He's an open wound. He's the muffled sound of someone who screamed inside for too long. He's the reflection of every black boy who learned not to expect anything from the world because he knew the world had already decided who he was. Have you ever stopped to think about what it means to grow up in a place where the ground is the same for everyone, but the water you drink is separate? Where your laughter echoes in a movie theater, you can't enter through the same door as everyone else. Racism isn't a hidden monster. It's visible, it's concrete. It seeps into the details, the looks, the silences. And Samuel was born in the middle of that concrete. He was molded there. He grew up among the shards of segregation. Martin Luther King Jr. would have looked at him and said, "You weren't the only one, but you were one of those who refused to bow their heads. And that matters, that changes everything." You know what's curious? Samuel studied at the same university that Martin graduated from, Morehouse College. But while one inspired crowds with words, the other, decades later, exploded with indignation at the inertia. The difference? Time. The pain? The same. In 1969, Samuel was part of a group that locked the university board of directors in a room. They demanded change. They shouted. They wanted King's death to be more than just a statue, a pretty memory. They wanted action. And what happened? Samuel was expelled, fingerprinted, watched. That's what happens when a black man decides to break the script. Martin would have said, "Peace isn't the absence of conflict. Peace is the presence of justice. And where there is no justice, there can be no peace." What Samuel did wasn't rebellion. It was consistency. Now you look at him today, on the screens, in the movies, at the top. Do you think he won? Do you think racism is a thing of the past? How often have you seen a black actor star without being trapped in a stereotype? How often are the roles they're given not molded in anger, violence, exaggerated resistance? Samuel realized this early on. They weren't going to hand him anything, so he became his own character, strong, unbreakable, because being subtle was never allowed for a black man who didn't want to be tamed. Martin Luther King would say that character who doesn't bend, who doesn't explain himself, who doesn't smile to please, he's not a role, he's a protest. Hollywood tried to fit him in, tried to soften him, but he resisted. And resisting in this case isn't glamour, it's a necessity, because the silence of success often tries to erase the origin of the pain. Samuel never let that happen. Have you ever noticed that even after being acclaimed, he still speaks? He talks about how racism still lives, how it's filtered, polished, but hasn't ceased to exist. He talks about the choice of black British actors for roles that portray the pain of African Americans, not because of talent, but to avoid the discomfort of those who live the truth. Have you ever noticed how convenient it is to hear the pain of someone who hasn't lived the scar? Samuel doesn't keep quiet, and Martin Luther King would say, that's courage, that's responsibility, because silence, when it comes from someone who can speak, is betrayal. Samuel isn't just an actor, he's a reminder, he's a living reminder that the wound never closed. That society only changed the words. But the contempt is still there, disguised as praise, representation, quotas. Do you understand what it means to be remembered for your color before your talent? Do you understand what it's like to be on stage and still be seen as a supporting actor in your own body? Martin Luther King always said, "What worries me isn't the cry of the wicked. It's the silence of the good." Samuel is the opposite of that silence. He's the uncomfortable noise. He's the discomfort that doesn't sell. He's the memory that insists, that comes back, that screams again. Because as long as there's a fire escape as the only entrance, no one can pretend we've won. Have you ever felt like you needed to become bigger than you are just to be seen? Have you ever had to toughen up to avoid being destroyed? Samuel L. Jackson lived that, and he carries that to this day. Behind the fame, behind the money, there's a man who remembers everything and chooses not to forget. Because forgetting is accepting. Martin Luther King Jr. would say, "Keep talking, Samuel, because when one of us goes silent, the system breathes a sigh of relief. But when one of us insists, even when tired, the world is forced to listen." Do you still believe that success erases pain? Do you still believe that representation is the end of the struggle? Samuel shows the opposite. He's there, present, but never fully included. Because true inclusion isn't just being there, it's belonging. It's not having to explain yourself. Martin Luther King wouldn't say the dream is over, but he would say it's dormant, and that people like Samuel are the call. They're the echo. They're the reminder that the fight isn't over. It's just changed scenery. And have you heard that call? So tell me, how long are we going to settle for symbolic presence and not concrete freedom? Have you ever stopped to think about how many times a black person's story is only celebrated after they've bled in silence? Samuel bled, since childhood, silently. When he climbed the movie theater stairs, no one heard what it caused inside. When he was pushed into a corner of society, no one asked how he felt. When he was expelled for fighting for justice, no one heard him. And now that he shines, they want to pretend the pain was left behind. But it wasn't. I, Martin Luther King, wouldn't let you believe that. Because I know that trick. The system is smart. It takes away your voice and then praises your silence. It denies you space and then applauds your resilience. But it never gives you back what it took. The fire escape may have disappeared from architecture, but it hasn't disappeared from the structure of society. There are still people climbing in secret. There are still people seeing the world through the cracks. Do you think Samuel forgot that? He remembers every day. Because every time someone pretends that racism no longer exists, that memory comes back like a blow. And this is where I want you to reflect. You see a successful man, I see a survivor. You see an award-winning artist. I see a marked body. You see someone who won. I see someone who is still fighting. And that's why Samuel is unsettling. He's not meek. He's not palatable. He's not there to fit into what they expect of him. And when he speaks, he doesn't soften it. Because he understood, as I understood, that soft words never changed violent structures. You may not like the way he says it, but you should pay attention to what he says. Because there's no gentle way to talk about injustice when it's brutal. And the deepest thing in all of this is that he could have kept quiet. He could have chosen comfort, settled into the privileges he had earned. But he chose memory. He chose to be the living reminder of what still needs to be faced. That's rare, because constant pain is tiring. The non-stop fight makes you sick. And even so, Samuel continues, do you think that's acting? No, that's legacy. That's awareness. And I need to ask you, what do you do with the pains you inherited? Do you remember them? Or do you pretend it's already past? Do you talk about it? Or did you choose silence to protect yourself? Samuel chose discomfort, and I tell you, only those who deeply love their people choose to keep screaming even when they no longer need to. But it doesn't stop there. Let's look at this discomfort he causes. Let's look with honesty. Why is it so unsettling to see a black man who doesn't thank you for being there, who doesn't ask permission to exist, who doesn't soften his truth? It's because the truth is scary, especially when it tears apart comfortable certainties, especially when it makes it clear that racism hasn't ended, it's just adapted. Today it's subtle, it's polite, it comes with smiles, with contracts, with stages, but it still says the same thing. You can be here as long as you behave as I expect. Samuel understood this early on. And you? Have you ever noticed how many times you had to mold yourself just so you wouldn't be seen as a threat? Have you ever noticed how much we're asked to be grateful for what shouldn't even be denied? Martin Luther King would say, don't accept emotional handouts disguised as opportunity. Don't accept the idea that we need to be exceptional to be respected, because humanity shouldn't be a prize. It should be the starting point. And yet, we're still trying to prove that we deserve to exist with dignity. Samuel L. Jackson isn't an exception. He's the portrait of what happens when a black man refuses to forget. The refusal to forget is revolutionary, because society wants to move forward without repairing the damage. It wants to celebrate stories of overcoming without taking responsibility for the causes of oppression. But overcoming without reparation is just repetition with another name. And if you feel that, it's because you still carry on your skin and in your soul the weight of a system that tries to teach you, from an early age, that you're worth less. And when you dare to disagree, they call you radical. But you know what's radical. Living in a society where we're still discussing whether Black lives matter or not. Samuel is called intense, and he is. But not because he exaggerates. It's because he hasn't anesthetized himself, and that's rare. Because constant pain invites us to get used to it. Repeated pain trains us to accept it. And Samuel refuses. Martin Luther King never asked for meekness in the face of injustice. He asked for firmness. Love with strength, peace with courage. Don't confuse that with passivity, because when the pain is constant, the response needs to be up to par. Samuel is a response. He's a living response, and that's why he's unsettling. Have you ever been that response? Have you ever allowed yourself to be unsettling so you wouldn't be silent? Or have you been adapting to fit where they never wanted you to be whole? I'm not here to comfort you. I'm here to remind you. And you need to remember, because when memory weakens, the system strengthens. When indignation dies, the structure imposes itself. Samuel keeps indignation alive. He speaks because he knows that if he doesn't speak, someone will pretend everything is okay. And everything is not okay. If a Black person needs to be a millionaire, award-winning, known all over the world to be heard, then everything is not okay. If, even so, he continues to be put aside, ignored, discredited, then everything is not okay. And if you think everything is okay, maybe you've moved too far away from your own story. Martin Luther King didn't speak to satisfied audiences. He spoke to dormant consciences. He didn't shout because he wanted applause. He shouted because he couldn't swallow it anymore. And Samuel, with his art, his stance, his courage, does the same thing. Can you feel that? Can you feel the discomfort that comes from seeing someone who refuses to smile when everything around demands that smile? That discomfort is important. It takes you out of your safe place, puts you back on track, and makes you remember the fight isn't over just because you got a job. It's not over because they follow you on social media. It's not over because now you can enter through the front door. As long as there are emotional fire escapes that separate us, as long as there is silence bought with opportunities, as long as the Black presence is tolerated and not celebrated, the fight continues. Samuel knows that. Martin Luther King knew that. And now, the question I leave you with is, do you still know? Do you feel the weight of all this? Because it's not just about Samuel. It's not just about the boy who climbed the stairs. It's not just about the student who was silenced. It's not just about the actor who screams when everyone expects him to smile. It's about you, too. About what you still keep silent. About what you accept every day pretending it's normal. About every time you disguise the pain to fit into an environment that was never made for you. Are you still pretending you've gotten used to it? That's what they want. They want you to adapt. They want you to mold yourself. They want you to hide. They want you to shut up. They want your obedience disguised as overcoming. They want you to repeat the story that everything has improved. But you know, deep down you know, it's not just about opportunity. It's about structure. And the structure continues. With different makeup, but with the same contempt. You can't allow yourself to forget. You can't let the success of a few erase the pain of many. You can't fall for the illusion that representation is reparation. It isn't. It's, at most, a door. And even that door still has a name, face, and scheduled time for who will enter. Have you ever noticed how many times you've been invisible? How many times they heard you but didn't listen to you? How many times you needed to repeat yourself more calmly, more sweetly, more carefully, just so you wouldn't seem aggressive? Racism doesn't scream like it used to, but it still speaks. It whispers in the subtext. It appears when you're the only Black person in a full room. When they distrust your competence. When they expect you to be grateful for the minimum. It appears in the sideways glances, in the promotions that never come, in the jokes that disguise disrespect. It appears in the tiredness you carry in your body, in the silence that suffocates you, in the anger you keep because you learned that if you show it, you'll be the one in the wrong. Do you understand why Samuel refuses to soften? Because softening is surrendering. And he didn't surrender. You don't need to surrender either. Martin Luther King would tell you that, firmly, without frills, without niceties. He would look you in the eye and ask, "How long are you going to accept living the way they say you should live? Because that's not living. It's surviving. And we didn't come this far to survive. You know that, and that's why you're here, because there's a part of you that no longer accepts keeping quiet. There's a part of you that burns, that pulsates, that wants to say what they never let you say out loud. And that part needs to breathe. You need to let it breathe. You need to remember that your story matters, that your pain isn't an exaggeration, that your revolt isn't drama, that your tiredness is legitimate, that your presence isn't a favor, that your voice doesn't need to ask permission. You need to remember. Samuel remembers. And remembering, in this world that insists on erasing the truth, is an act of resistance. You can choose to pretend you don't feel it anymore, or you can choose to feel everything and transform that into movement. Don't wait for someone to tell you when it's time. The time is now, because as long as you breathe, there's a chance to change course. While you speak, there's enough noise to bother those who have always been comfortable. And it's that discomfort that changes things. You want to know where the end of racism begins? It doesn't start with a law or a hashtag. It starts when you decide to no longer accept what was set as your destiny, when you refuse to be molded, when you start asking questions that no one wants to answer, when you stop trying to fit in and start taking up space. Are you ready for that? Because if you are, then don't look back. Don't dim your light. Don't edit your truth. Don't settle for less. You come from a people who survived with almost nothing. Now it's time to do something with that. Time to use every wound as strength. Time to turn every no into an affirmation. Time to be more than what they allowed you to be. And if at any point they make you doubt yourself, remember the boy who climbed the stairs on the side of the movie theater. He could have become a statistic, but he became a voice. Now it's your turn. If this resonates with you, comment. If it reminds you of something you've experienced, write it down. If you know someone who needs to hear this, send it to them. But don't keep it to yourself. Don't swallow it. Don't leave it for later. Because every time you speak, an imposed silence is broken. And every silence that is broken weakens the structure that keeps us down. And that's how we start to change everything.